My name is Maya Cox, and I am a program coordinator at the Center on Community Living and Careers. And you are attending Pulling It Together, Building Your Brand. This is the last Check and Connect in our series for agency CEOs and program managers. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. In the center screen, you'll see the PowerPoint, which our presenters will be speaking from today. To the right of our presentation is the captioning pod, where you can get live captions. On the bottom, to the left of the captioning pod, is the chat box. Please use the chat box to ask any questions you might have during today's presentation, and I'll collect the questions so that our presenters can answer them at the end of the session. You can also indicate if you're having any technical difficulties, and we'll try to help you troubleshoot. So use that chat box for whatever you need. To the left of the chat box are files to download, and you'll find today's presentation in a PDF form for you to download and share with your colleagues if it's helpful. And then we just have our attendance list. So at this point, I'd like to thank everyone again for coming and joining us. And I will hand it off to Kelly Land, who is with our speakers today. Kelly?
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm Kelly Land, and welcome to Pulling It Together, Building Your Brand. And today I am actually going to be allowing Kim DeQueese from Region 1 Supervisor of Vocational Rehabilitation and Clint Bolzer, the CEO of Logan Center, talk about building your brand. We'll be talking about communication, relationships, partnerships, as well as marketing throughout this presentation, trying to pull together the last 4 sessions that we've had for you guys. So we hope you enjoy. And I'm first going to introduce Kim and let her talk a little bit about her bio and her past working with vocational rehabilitation.
All right, thanks, Kelly. It's great to be with y'all today. So I've been with the VR team since 1989, and I'm currently serving as a region manager up here in northern Indiana in Region 1. And my region covers the 11 northern counties in the northwest corner of Indiana, which includes Lake, Newton, Porter, LaPorte, Jasper, Pulaski, Stark, St. Joe, Marshall, Elkhart, and Kosciuszko County. And I've also had opportunity to participate on the Employment Services Work Group that's played an integral part in the development of the VR Employment Services that was rolled out in July of 15. And I'll turn it over to Clint.
Well, thanks, Kim, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to Kelly and Indiana Institute for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. Give you a little bit of background on myself. As Kelly mentioned, I am currently the CEO at Logan Community Resources in South Bend, Indiana. I came to Logan from an organization in Indianapolis called Noble. I've been with Logan for the past 5 years. I actually started in January of 2012. As I tell people, I've basically my entire professional life has been supporting individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in a variety of jobs. Actually, I started in 1998 with a provider in Richmond, Indiana at the time, Green Acres Center, now known as Achiever Resources. They do more advocacy nowadays, but back when I was there, we were a service provider and started my career in the community employment program. It was at that time where I became really passionate about providing opportunities for people with disabilities from the standpoint of helping them obtain and maintain a competitive employment in our community. So,
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I need to ask that you please speak up. We're having trouble hearing you through the audio.
Got it.
As loudly as possible, please.
Okay, and so basically, when I worked in the community employment program at Green Acres Center and Achieva, that was at the time where I became passionate about this particular program. and continue to work in providers that provide that service. Not that I'm in the day-to-day operations of community employment, but it's a passion of mine as we continue to serve people now and into the future.
Great. Thank you, Clint. Thank you, Kim. So we're going to now talk about mission-driven expectations. That's one of the first things that we talked about during this webinar series. And Clint, as he said in the past, has a passion and the drive to work with people with intellectual disabilities and get them employment into the community. So he's going to talk a little bit about bringing that service back to Logan and how it followed the mission of Logan.
Thanks, Kelly. So as Kelly mentioned, again, probably the audience consists of providers that have provided this type of service for a long time. There might be some new providers, but I did want to share the story about Logan because at the end of the day, it really is around building an expectation within an organization based upon your mission. And actually, Logan was a service provider for several years and decided, and this was prior to my time, decided in 2007 to not provide community employment any longer. When I joined the organization in January of 2012, obviously at that time we weren't a provider, and because of my past experience, I felt extremely passionate that we needed to make that change. And so I'll reference the first 3 bullet points on my rationale and really driving home the expectations in the organization around the mission. First of all, my message to the organization was it was absolutely the right thing to do to be able to provide this option to people. You know, as we all know, having a job is the cornerstone of any person, a big part of our life, and so the people that we serve should have those same type opportunities when we're talking about employment in the community. The second thing was, the second bullet point is that we all do this. We talk about community options, enhancing those community options for people, inclusiveness. And if we're preaching that, there's no doubt that competitive and integrated employment opportunities should be a part of that mix. And so we felt it was important, or I felt it was important to have that message as well. And then our mission is really simple, and it supports people with intellectual and developmental disabilities so they may achieve their desired quality of life. And if you really dive into the mission of this, is that individuals have and had a desire to have gainful employment in the community. And if that's their desire, we as a provider should no doubt work to our advantage to make that a possibility for people. So because of that message, we really began to look at it strategically, and thanks to the Bureau of Rehab Services for allowing us to become a provider in 2013. And we actually started that with one person, and anytime you're in a startup mode, it's a challenge. And so we really needed a jump start, and we got input from our staff. We put our Logan Industries and our community employment program all under one umbrella so we could work together collaboratively on behalf of the success of clients. We actually created an employment service mission. We developed strategies. We basically put a plan in place to say, hey, we want our organization to know that placing and giving people an opportunity to work in the community is important. That's it.
Okay, this is Kim, and I'm going to talk a little bit, we want to advance the slide there, about vocational rehabilitation's mission, and that is to assist persons with disabilities in achieving greater independence through employment. And of course, we do that by providing a variety of services that are necessary for an individual with a disability to prepare for, enter, or maintain employment. And as the Check and Connect series has highlighted, VR's employment services can offer a variety of tools, such as the job shadowing or informational interviewing, situational assessments, and work experience opportunities that are all geared toward assisting consumers and their team to determine and solidify a good job match for that consumer. And of course, what other services and accommodations might be necessary to ensure that consumers' employment success. But one thing is, I was thinking about the mission as well that I think is important for our providers and for VR staff is to be able to be aware and understand the broad scope of services that vocational rehabilitation can provide, not only employment services, but in addition to employment services to enhance that employment success. So I just wanted to point out on that third bullet point there, just that VR has the ability to provide for other things such as that you might not think about, like post-secondary training or maybe professional licensing expenses, adaptive equipment, or maybe rehabilitation engineering to change up how a work site might look in order for an individual with a disability to perform the job tasks.
Great, and as we go through the PowerPoint, we're going to actually have 3 key points today that we'd love for people to take away with them. And the first one is going to be working together as a partnership. So it's important, we heard the provider's mission statement and VR's mission, but now it's how do them working together for their mission for one common goal is what we're all looking for. We're all hoping for people to get people that we work with, our job seekers, jobs in the community. And you're only going to do that by putting your missions together and making it a partnership for the success of that job seeker. So now we're going to talk a little bit about aligning your resources. Sorry, I think there we go. We moved forward one. So we're going to talk about aligning your resources. And this is something that Clint pointed out as we were talking through this PowerPoint and kind of our branding, is that you have to align all your resources, and that includes your internal and external resources. So he's going to talk a little bit about that, and then Kim will talk more about the external resources, including vocational rehabilitation.
Well, on this slide, I'm just going to just make one point. And we were in a unique situation here at Logan because we were beginning to start back into community employment. So it was important for us to really look at a plan and also identify what our internal resources were that we needed to align with in order to make this this initiative a success. But we also needed to identify those external resources as well, and put a plan together on how to align. And again, I'll make this point: whether you're an organization that's provided community employment services for a very long time, I think it's a good practice and a responsibility of providers to every so often sit down and identify what those internal resources are, what those external resources are, and really analyze and evaluate, is your community employment program aligned with those, and are they working in tandem to create successes for the people that are in your program. And so I'm going to have Kim talk about the external resource in vocational rehab.
Okay, so what I wanted to speak about a little bit in terms of aligning resources, what comes to mind for me is just the importance of both the VR counselor and the employment specialist understanding that we have this common goal, and that being the successful employment of the consumer. And to me, that common goal is the foundation and driving force of that successful relationship, and ultimately results in the long-term success for our consumers. So for example, when we ask things of each other, such as a VR counselor asking an employment specialist, or vice versa, the employment specialist asking things of the VR counselor, that we need to take care that it's done in such a way that speaks to that consumer's specific need, and that that request is evident that it's a step toward achieving that common goal of successful employment for the consumer. So that might mean at times that our requests are not necessarily the easiest or the fastest or most convenient for each of us, but nonetheless, when we keep to our common goal and keep that at the forefront and articulate those requests along those lines, I think we can create a place where our working relationship flourishes.
And I do need to flip this. So I want to talk a little bit about the internal resources and building those internal resources, which are very important in the process. And again, as I mentioned before, it's good for providers to do this every once in a while. I mean, obviously, if you're new, it makes sense, but even if you're a long-term community employment provider, it's good to evaluate the internal processes. So, and what I'm going to say about this is really identifying your internal processes can be an organic process. And I believe it starts with the message that you want to present throughout the organization. And that message should absolutely be the same. And probably with many providers, and in Logan's case, our message was community and integrated employment opportunities for the people that we serve are important to Logan. And then you have a follow-up question with this, with that message is, if that's important to us as an organization, what and who internally do we need to align with us to make this successful? All right? And so I'll move to the second bullet point in regards to the internal. It all started with a strategic planning process. And the first and foremost, we needed to get our board of directors involved and aligned with what we wanted to do, and that message of community integrated employment for the people that we serve is important to Logan. We also look at what I talked about earlier, the mission-driven part of it. It's the right thing to do. It goes directly along with our mission of people having the desire to go out and work in the community, so we as a provider needed the support to make those things happen. Another resource that I'd like to talk about is you need to align yourself internally with the finance department and the finance committee of the board level, because ultimately when you are having that message and it's an important part of who you are as an organization, you've got to build and invest resources to make that happen. You know, in our case, it was a new program to us, so we needed resources to make that happen. Advanced training, to hire staff, and anytime you're doing something new, you're not going to reap the revenue immediately to sustain that. So we had to invest in the process. Obviously, it's important to get your leadership on board. It's important to get all of your residential staff on board. So everybody in the process has to understand what your message is and what do you want, why do you want to accomplish what you want to accomplish. One of the things that we did is we asked Kelly and the Indiana Institute to come in and host education, awareness, and really present the plan of what Logan wants to do in regards to community employment. And we really had some nice discussion and input from a diverse group of staff across the organization to get them on board with making this a priority in our organization. The other thing I want to talk about is marketing. It's not on this particular slide, but a very important internal resource in an organization is marketing. And if you're a big provider, you may have a marketing department. So aligning with that marketing department is extremely important. And as we know as providers, marketing employment services can be different than your typical marketing efforts as the entire organization. Logan is continuing to work currently right now to improve this as we move forward. But because as you think about it, our employment services, marketing our employment services program is very targeted. And sometimes we have different messages that are targeted to different groups. For example, we have a message to the business community that not only do we have a motivated, dependable, skilled, untapped employee, potential employees, but we also need to have or craft a message about the multiple services that we as a provider offer to that particular business. As job developers, you have to have a very targeted message sometimes to specific employers. You know, that's a marketing piece that you may have to have assistance with. Another target message is obviously creating a message to target individuals and families, helping VR with the selection process. Obviously, you want to get that information out to individuals and families. The message here is that marketing is a key piece in aligning your internal resources, and it's very good for providers really to sit down and if you have availability of an outside consultant or you have the resources to have a marketing staff to come together with your team and really create a specific marketing plan on how you want to tackle these different messages that you're trying to create. Oh, and then I'll move right into external resource. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you know, obviously identifying your external resources along with your internal resources are important. Many of you, many providers do this, but obviously one of the couple of things we did is we hosted outreach series, lunch and learn events to the community, different aspects of the community, one for parents, one for businesses, one for providers, case managers, obviously being involved in your local chamber events are very important. An external resource is the Office of Workforce Development and establishing that relationship. I think it's important to have ally businesses, people that you're comfortable with, that hire people with disabilities, that have success stories, that can be ambassadors for your program. Obviously, board members are key. Now with the pre-employment transition service initiatives across the state, school administration and personnel, beads, case managers, and obviously vocational rehabilitation.
So in speaking about external resources with regard to vocational rehabilitation and how providers might think about us, I think that it's vital, as I said a couple of slides ago, that service providers and of course VR counselors alike to be aware of the variety of services that VR can offer. As I spoke about again a couple slides ago, just various things that we can provide, from adaptive technology to workplace engineering, short-term therapies, all to support that person in that successful job placement. I would say that we shouldn't shy away from discussing or thinking outside the box with regard to what services might be available and beneficial for the consumer's long-term job success. If you don't ask, you don't know, and communication is the key. Service providers should approach VR counselors, and likewise VR counselors should approach service providers, and together think creatively on how we can fill the gap in terms of a barrier that might present itself. Over the past few years, many new VR counselors have come on board, and so I would encourage also VR counselors to approach their supervisors if they too are in doubt about whether VR can provide a particular service, or use their supervisors to help them think about and create solutions to an employment barrier. Just briefly, I wanted to mention too, with the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, we're emphasizing career counseling for sub-minimum wage workers. And that emphasis is given toward creating employment opportunities for individuals who traditionally have limited competitive employment options. So again, thinking creatively is going to be critical. So for example, utilizing workplace assistance, which is a service that's available under both the Family Support Waiver and the Community Integration and Habilitation Waiver. And that includes things like job site assistance for accomplishing personal care tasks, such as meals, hygiene, administration of medication, and things like that. So again, using those services to think creatively on how might we avail a person who is in sub-minimum wage employment to competitive integrated employment. Other ideas might be enlisting worksite engineering services so that, for example, a rehab engineer coming into a work site and developing solutions for how that work environment can be changed or accommodated so a consumer can, within their physical abilities, be able to do that job task.
I would also quickly add too, and this is more in line with Kim was talking about vocational rehabilitation. I think we as providers, specifically job developers, have to think creatively and outside the box with employers as well. And I'll just reference, and many of you probably heard of her, but Denise Bissonette. If you have not or have never heard her talk or read her books, you should. But she talks specifically about job development or a job developer as being a bridge connecting people who are able and willing to work to employers that don't believe it or don't understand it. And if you really think about that, that's exactly what job development is. And so we as job developers have to think creatively when you think about it that way. And don't be afraid to have discussions with employers on the importance of this to help them lessen the threat or risk that they might be perceiving. And, you know, coming up with examples like having an employer experience an interview with a prospect employee, coming up with half-day job shadowing opportunities where an actual individual is shadowing somebody at a place of employment, partnering with the employer to do tours of the businesses, things of that nature. So just thinking creatively and not being afraid to talk to employers specifically that haven't had that experience of hiring a person with a disability. All those things are good to help build that relationship with that external resource.
Great. That was all great information. Our key point 2 here is internal and external resources are equally important to success. And the only thing that I would add to this is that it's great to identify those resources, but then you have to utilize them. Once they're utilized, that's where you're going to start seeing the success in your employment program. So first, getting the people internally on board, utilizing your resources on board with the employment program is going to help be successful, but then working with VR and all your external resources, including the businesses, which I think we sometimes forget, then you're going to be even more successful. Using that creative thinking either with the business, or Kim made some great ideas of using the rehab engineer coming on and helping you identify maybe some of those barriers or those fears that those employers are having. And it's about, first of all, working that partnership, then utilizing and identifying those internal and external resources. The next thing we're going to talk about is probably the most important piece, and this is about building a relationship. And employment services is a little bit different. You have 3 different customers. You have VR, you also have the businesses, and then you have the job seeker. And so building that relationship with all 3 of those entities is going to be extremely important to see success in your employment services program. So we're going to first start talking about this. Here. And Kim is on board to talk about relationships.
Thanks, Kelly. So as I see relationships in employment services and working with providers, to me it seems as though there are 4 key components in terms of the relationship. So with I think about the consumer, I think about the employer, the service provider, and vocational rehabilitation. And as I see it, I mean, simultaneously, we must understand that it's important that the consumer and employer, we understand their needs both. So utilizing discovery services to the fullest extent possible is a must in order to understand and actually drill down to that consumer's abilities, interests, and desires. And of course, echoing what Clint said, understanding our employers. What are their needs? Talking to them, interviewing the employer, work site visits so that we understand thoroughly what their business needs and operational needs are so that we make sure we're making that best fit for the consumer and the employer. And then going a step further, that relationship between their service providers and vocational rehabilitation, understanding what both the provider and the vocational rehab counselor contribute to that employment scenario is just vital in fostering the relationship whereby we can develop those creative solutions to the barriers that our consumer faces. In understanding that we all have a common goal, we're all working toward that same thing, and that's the consumer being successful, but understanding that each of us has a different, unique role, not being fearful to ask questions of each other, and being confident to put forth new ideas or suggestions for change. Change is hard, but it's the only way we move forward. So not being fearful to ask those questions and make those suggestions for change. And then, of course, approaching each other with empathy and as equal team members. It's a hard job that we all do. And so as approaching each other with kindness and empathy is going to be vital as well. While our roles might be different, nonetheless, the end goal is the same, and that's the consumer's employment success.
These two slides, the one that Kim just talked about, and this particular slide that's up on the screen now, basically can go hand in hand. I mean, everything that Kim talked about being kind, having empathy, working as a team, we all have the same mission. Kim, it has to do with the relationships that you build as well, not only with VR, not only with the individuals that you serve, but also the businesses as well. But I will talk a little bit about the also included in this list is having expectations for your staff. I think that's really, really important. And having high expectations for your staff, specifically around the relationships that you're building, not only with VR, but also with the businesses that you're trying to include in the process. You know, moving on down and making a priority to develop new relationships is extremely important. You know, we can get caught up into calling on the same businesses, having that same, because it's easy. We fall into that rut, going back to the same business after business because they know they have experience with us. They'll listen to us. They'll hire somebody if a job is open. But in order for us to really maximize and develop new relationships, we cannot be afraid in setting those expectations with your staff to go out and call on different businesses to expand your message, to expand your relationships is extremely important. And, you know, a one call and someone will listen to you and you go in and make your presentation is not going to get the trick done. You've got to be persistent. And you got to set the expectations with your staff that they got to follow up, and because the only way a true relationship is going to be developed is if you get in front of those businesses and counselors more often and have dialogue about what you're trying to accomplish. The other thing that I would say, and I think the second bullet point, we highlight communicate, and you may need to pick up the phone. I mean, let's face it, today's age, the preferred method of communication is email or some type of electronic communication. And it's easy to hide behind a computer But the reality is, in order to enhance relationships and build quality relationships, don't be afraid to pick up the phone, because that human connection is really where relationships are built. And even if you can get face-to-face meetings, that's the preferred method. So even though technology makes us more efficient and it's a lot easier, we get more accomplished, I would venture to say that we've got to carve out some time to have those personal relationships so we can build upon those day in and day out.
Well, I'm so glad to hear Clint say those things, because I'll tell you what, he's quite a few years younger than I am, and I felt like I was old school, but some of the things I wanted to say on this slide really have to do with just the electronic communication. I know email and text are so much more easier and maybe more efficient, but there really is no substitute to that face-to-face human contact for building relationships and picking up the phone. And sometimes actually picking up the phone can be much quicker in getting something accomplished, and again, making sure that that you're aligned with the goal, that you're picking up the phone and talking to the VR counselor if there's something that you might need to get done quickly, or have talking about a discussion about solutions that you might be stuck on, that maybe the VR counselor could have some input on. So picking up that phone. And I guess the other thing is to not be fearful about following up. Sometimes things can get bogged down in our inbox or messages deleted inadvertently. And so don't be fearful about following up and calling. And if you haven't gotten a response from a vocational rehab counselor, I would say by all means follow up and make sure that they've gotten the message.
So I am going to put Kim a little bit on the spot. Kim has some great things that she's been doing up here in Region 1 with getting providers and VR counselors together to help build that relationship. And I'm going to ask if you can just speak on that maybe for about a minute or so, especially we're on this key point of communicating between the provider, VR, and businesses.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Kelly. So one of the suggestions I have toward creating the best opportunities for productive communication is for managers to ensure there's some face-to-face introductions going on for new staff. And this might seem basic, but honestly, during times of high turnover, when there seems to really not be enough time in the day to get our work accomplished, this is really a vital step in the relationship building that shouldn't be ignored. And when new staff come on board, I would say both VR counselors and employment specialists, care should be taken to visit each other's offices, so introductions can take place, not only with direct staff like the VR counselors and employment specialists, but with other staff as well that are doing things behind the scenes. So in VR, we have our VR case coordinators and even our secretary, who is that first point of contact. Being able to put a face with the name, so that when you do pick up the phone or you are shooting an email, you have that relationship that's been built. Another tool that assists, I think, in good communication is for periodic meetings to be scheduled between program managers and VR managers, just as a way to check in. So meeting face-to-face where you can focus on that relationship piece, and then while at the same time troubleshooting things that may not be working and calling attention to what is working. This is a good feedback loop we found here in Region 1 toward program and consumer success. And we've also been able to identify in these types of venues any training needs that might need to be addressed, and then putting a plan forth on how we, as and partnering with our providers, are going to address that, that training need. And then in those meetings too, new ideas can be put forth for program enhancement that either the VR supervisor or myself as a region manager can take back to VR leadership and make these suggestions, make them aware of these suggestions.
I also want to chime in really quick too, because in regards to this whole relationship topic, and then the communicating topic as well. You know, we talk about relationships and building them up with our customers, And when we talk about customers, as Kim and Kelly stated, we're talking about both rehab, businesses, clients. But one of the points I want to make is we cannot forget about the families as well. We have to know that families are a key point, and we need to make sure that us as providers consciously communicate to families what our message is, the message that I talked about earlier, and what our mission is around community employment and what our outcomes want to be. It's also important to communicate to families the next steps in the process because this whole thing is a process and it takes time. So whether more discovery is happening, if they're going from discovery to job development, what that's going to look like, are there challenges, what are the good things that are going on? The bottom line is, as you're communicating, it's key for VR businesses and clients, but don't forget about the families. And they're also a key point in developing those natural supports as well. We can't forget that.
Those are all really good points, and I think probably most of us have heard some of this stuff, but I think it's important for us to put that into action. So I asked Kim and Clint to come up with some stories that building relationships with businesses, doing your marketing, working with VR one-on-one through communication, and how that's been successful for a client. So they both came up with stories, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy hearing how these have worked out in a positive manner.
Okay, I'll start. Actually, it's a really good story. I'm biased, but I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. But basically, Logan had an individual that came to us, and they were working with our community employment staff. I'll give our community employment staff credit. Her name is Charlene. And she was in the discovery phase, and this happened in June of 2016. And after meeting several times with Charlene, Charlene inquired about her struggle, the client's struggle to make eye contact when speaking with her. And it was at that time the client divulged that she was not happy with her teeth, and consequently her smile, so she felt more comfortable looking down when speaking, and in hopes that it would be less noticeable. So obviously Charlene was concerned about this, specifically on the employment side, and so I don't think she knew that that if VR could help or not, but she went out and reached out to the vocational rehabilitation counselor. His first name's Ken, and explained the situation. Charlene received a response from the counselor within just a few minutes when she reached out, and then 2 days later, they worked together to modify a plan for the client. VR completed a referral for the individual to go to get some consultation at a local office that specialized in dentures. The client attended all the appointments, and in September, she received her partial dentures, which obviously helped this situation out significantly. Charlene was able to notice a change in the client immediately. She made eye contact when speaking and smiled with confidence. Tracy was moved into placement in November of 2016 and was offered a job just 2 weeks later. She currently is working with their employer, and things are going well. So that's just a prime example of noticing a challenge, how it's going to affect an employment situation, reaching out, being creative, working with your counselor, and then having a success come to fruition at the end.
Great story, Clint. So the story that I want to share, I thought spoke to the great communication, but also how the key partners working together resulted in the success for this consumer. So the story that I have is about a gentleman who was placed as a dishwasher actually at one of our local restaurants here in the Elkhart area. And as time went on and the person was working, what happened was the consumer developed a bit of foot discomfort, but really didn't share that with anyone initially. And so shortly thereafter, the job coach realized that the consumer had actually been going into the worksite bathroom and calling their family to pick him up early from work, and because of this foot pain. And initially no one knew that that's what the issue was, but because of that relationship that the employment specialist had developed with the consumer, she was able to get to the bottom of the issue. And then in conjunction with his family and the VR counselor, arranged for that consumer to secure an evaluation and then ultimately be fitted with orthotic shoe inserts that were prescribed by his doctor. In the meantime, while all that was going on, the employer also was made aware of the situation with the consumer's foot pain. And the employer went ahead and secured a cushioned mat for the consumer to stand on at his workstation. And of course, that incidentally helped the other dishwashers at that work site as well. So kind of a double positive there. And also the employer modified this consumer's work schedule until the orthotics arrived. Happy to report that the consumer is now doing really well on his job, and the foot pain has been eliminated. And I think that this situation might not have worked out so well had everyone not done their part to find solutions to the issue. While the employment specialist was an integral part in identifying, the issues at hand, again, I think it took team effort to ultimately result in this consumer success.
Those are wonderful stories, and thank you both of you for giving those. I am now going to go to kind of closing points and summarize this. But while I'm doing this, I wanted to remind everybody that in the chat box, if you guys have any questions for Kim or Clint, you are more than welcome to type them in there, and we will get to those. Hopefully, I have a few minutes at the end of this to answer those. So just as some closing points, some things that we really would like for you to take away is that staff structure is key. And that doesn't, sometimes we've talked about staff structure in the past. It doesn't mean exactly how you are aligning your employment specialists, but it's maybe all the resources that you're using for the staff as well, giving them the resources to be successful in the community. I think understanding your internal and external resources and building those relationships within your organization and also in your community is going to help you be more successful as well. Quality communication with your internal and external relationships. We've talked about sometimes we just have to pick up that phone, or you might have to do some follow-up or be a little persistent depending on what the situation is. Mission driven from the top down. I think that you have to have everybody within the organization on board that employment is going to be a priority for your organization for it to be successful. Clients first. Working on behalf of the clients and everything you are doing for those clients. Those are billable activities. VR is not asking you to go do things outside of your realm that's not paid for, but it also is important for you to know that VR and the provider both want the same thing for the job seeker. Look at the client, explain what their need is, and I don't want to guarantee for Kim or VR's behalf, but I think usually you can find some middle ground to make sure that that client is going to be successful. And then VR and provider partnership is and should be a priority. Building that relationship so you can work together for that common goal. Is there anything to add?
Perfect.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap. So I think at this time, you can tell how excited they are. I think at this time they're more than willing to take questions for a few minutes if anybody has any. Okay, so it looks like we have a question from Naomi Finley Russell. Sorry if I did not pronounce that correctly. I am a new employment specialist. I have a question as to methods used in developing the business partnerships. Are there any techniques that you can share? Clinton's making me talk. So I think I've been working with Logan Center through the technical assistance grant or service that we're working on the partnership with VR and developing business partnerships. Something that we have tried to work on is actually giving a goal. When Clint talked about higher expectations for your staff, we've given a goal to the employment specialist to reach out to new businesses each month. So they have a set amount of new businesses they're supposed to reach out to each month. And then they come back and kind of use a spreadsheet about what they found out about those businesses. So let's say, for example, they reach out to the Parks Department and the Parks Department says, great, nice to meet you, but we're not going to be hiring until May. That goes back on a spreadsheet, and then they can come back to it in May and say, oh, we need to go back and reach out to the Parks Department. And at that time, you have the person's name, their contact information, and you're also keeping a follow-up track about when I need to reach back out to those businesses. I also think it's important that you set that a specific number of new businesses, because as Clint shared earlier, it's easy to keep going back to those same businesses that you have that common relationship with. But if you set an expectation that you want your staff to see new businesses each month, then they're going to start looking outside of those, I would say, common relationships or comfortable relationships that they have.
And Naomi, I would also add too, I don't think there's any specific right or wrong method that you can use to develop business partnerships. I think that you need to concentrate on getting involved. I would start with getting involved in your local chamber. If you are a community service provider, that you have some tenured staff from a job development standpoint, I would utilize them to connect you with employers that, as I called, are your allies, and go meet with them to see if they can refer any potential new business partnerships that you could contact and utilize their names to at least get you in the door, because I think that is the key. If you can get in the door with new prospect businesses and share with them your message and begin to have dialogue about what you are trying to accomplish and the services that you provide, that will help you out. So tapping into community resources and people that you already have relationships is really important.
Naomi, I would just add one thing. This is Kim. I would say that reaching out to your business service representatives in your local Work One offices can also give you leads for potential businesses that might be hiring, at the current time.
No, Naomi, I thought of one other thing too. Kelly just reminded me of this. Use your internal leadership as well, specifically if you're a not-for-profit. That not-for-profit has a volunteer a board of directors that are made up of probably community leaders that potentially have influence in the business community. Tap into those resources. Set up lunches with those board members. Obviously, get permission from your CEO, but set a time up where they can help you potentially draft a list of businesses that they would help you connect with.
I feel like you got lots of resources there. You ask us questions, we can continue to talk, I'm sure. It looks like we have another question maybe coming in. So while I'm waiting for that question to come in, I also wanted to mention that the Center on Community Living and Careers, we will be hosting some job development regional trainings this April. We'll be doing those regionally throughout the state. So be on the outlook for those, or look out for those, either on our website, or you also will get emails that will be talking about those and who they will reach out to specifically, but they really will help those employment specialists that are maybe struggling with that piece. It's not always easy to go knock on those doors, and we understand that. So we're hoping to give you some more resources this spring to help you guys feel more comfortable with that piece of the employment services model. I'm going to give just a couple more seconds. I think there's a question coming in. Okay, well, I see that Sarah was trying to ask a question, but the chat box isn't cooperating, and we understand that. So you are more than welcome to email me directly with that question, Sarah, and I'll put my email in the chat box for you, and we will follow back up with you. But I just really want to reach out to Kim and Clint, and thank you guys for putting time in for this, giving us those wonderful success stories and helping people move forward with their employment services. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great afternoon.